What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel and another Outriders video. I think it comes as no surprise and it's very well documented that I am a pyro main. I love all things pyro, and really even when I'm not playing pyro, I'm playing pyro. So today we're going to be looking at a build for the Technomancer which kind of revolves around being hyper mobile, ramping up for massive cold snap sweeps, and essentially burning the entire world down with a combination of frost, toxic and Blightfire. I was toying with the idea of this build since I started playing Technomancer in the new expansion, with triple turret Techno of course being super strong, and while my turrets were plugging away and murdering everything in happy glee, I was looking for pieces that specifically I could use to essentially build this almost like no interaction Technomancer build that kind of plays like a speedrun pyro, essentially running around and dropping massive AoEs to watch enemies melt away, but also debuffing enemies so that it is a good class to run with other players, allowing them to basically shoot enemies at their own pace because everything is frozen and standing still, so you can get those headshots done, and just also debuffing everything with these massive dots that burn them to death over time, thereby just leaving the captains, elites and bosses left over for my teammates to cancel. Now this build is ridiculously good at killing trash. In fact, it might be the most efficient build I've seen yet at killing trash. Shit just melts away, you don't have to bother shooting them, anything like that. You just run past enemies, fucking hit them with the cold snap. That gets, obviously triggers lethal devices, stuff gets toxic on them, and because we have so many mods on this gear that accentuate the toxic damage as well as damage against stuff that is toxic and frozen, it just melts through enemies. Now when it comes to captains, elites and bosses, captains and elites also tend to not be an issue. So the real thing here is, how do we heighten our damage profile so that we can deal with bosses that, like life bar bosses, so big bosses like the second arbiter and like some of the bosses that we see at the end of expeditions like Dr. D, for example. So I've taken some steps in the gear and some things that I've done. Obviously you'll see the inclusion of the reload mechanism meta here, so of course we're using moaning winds, clip combustion and radiation splash for that additional extra damage there. And then of course I've also worked out a couple of different mods in here to just sort of stack up additional damage onto bosses. But the bottom line is this: the build is really good at dealing with trash, and a bit weaker, or I would say its strong suit is not dealing with bosses. Now I will also make a suggestion as to changes that you can make in the PAX tree if you want the build to be a lot better against bosses, but then you will suffer some of the clear speed that you have against trash. So really the choice will be up to you in the end how you want to play it. You can even change it mid-run, so you can play it a certain way as you go through trials, and when you get up to bosses you quickly make the change, and there's literally nothing else that you have to change in the build. You just make the change to the PAX tree and you'll actually see the additional damage roll in on the bosses. Now when we look at the actual build itself, let's go ahead and talk about weapons first, and then we go to armor, we go to our skills and our rotation, we talk about our choices in the class tree, our PAX choices, and lastly I can make some suggestions for ascension points you should target first. Now we're gonna just start it off right off the bat and talk about pistols. In the footage you saw just now, you saw me running around like a hooligan with pistols out, and that's because specifically when it comes to this build, I have the perfect pistol here for this, and it allows me to ramp up the AP skills like cold snap and all of that I'm using. And this is something with Mage's Rage on and then Fortress on, giving that additional ramp there. Now this is on Torment and Agony, which is a full auto variation of the pistols, so you can really quickly get those shots off and get Mage's Rage to stack up. And the point is, it's relatively easy to hit headshots with pistols in the first place. So it kind of like, again, it suits the style of this build. You kind of just run and dropping your AoEs and everything like that all over the place. So generally speaking, you'll always see me running and having the pistols out. Next up, for our reload mechanic, I have the guillotine here with radiation splash, moaning winds and clip combustion on. That is of course all three of the mods in the game that do this reload thing. So this basically means that anything that survives that combo of yours where you freeze and then toxic stuff and it doesn't die to the dot, you can just run past them and hit them once with this reload cycle, and that'll kind of take care of that. Now when it comes to fighting bosses and stuff with a big health bar, what I then do is I use a sniper rifle with weakness trap, firestorm and omen on. This allows me to stack some additional debuffs on the enemies, as well as putting the debuff for additional damage from omen on the enemy, and bleed, which we further on capitalize with some of the mods in the gear. Weakness trap on here as well. So this would be essentially like my boss debuff stick in a way. Now, generally speaking, if I'm just running through the map, I got pistols out, I'm going, I'm ramping up here and there when I feel like it. And then if there's something that kind of like doesn't want to die from toxic, I just hit him with the reload from the shotgun. So the only time when I take out the sniper rifle is in the moment when I see a big red bar for a boss. And when we get over to the gear itself, of course, we are using Flame Leper. Now, again, in the test that I've done, and certainly some other content creators that they've done as well, it seems like Flame Leper is obviously not interacting in a favorable way with the toxic mods and all of that. And I think in an ideal world, perhaps this is something that needs to be addressed by PCF, but in an ideal world, I would expect those two to essentially benefit from the same mods, which doesn't seem to be the case. So nonetheless, the star of this build will be toxic. You will see when you finish a map, you will see almost all of your damage comes from toxic, and that's due to the way that we stack the mods on here. But Blight Fire also does add on a little bit of damage to this as well. Now, do you have to use Flame Leper to play this way? Absolutely not. The only reason I chose to use Flame Leper is, of course, Flame Leper has a lot of the mods already that we need to make this build work. Now, Anomaly is, of course, what we want to stack on here. We want to stack as much status power as we can as well, because that means that the ticks from Toxic will just, tick longer. Plus, it means that your frozen status lasts longer on enemies as well. So status is really good for us. Cooldown reduction is also obviously a bonus, because we want to have as many cold snaps as we can, and we want to have it come back as soon as possible, because that's really the ultimate way for us to do our AoE sweep across the map. Now, our first mod on here is Alchemical Mastery, which says that when you use blighted rounds, it increases your weapon or your anomaly power based on your status power. Now, we are not using blighted round on this build, so this is a dead mod to us at the moment right now, and something that ideally I would like to swap for maybe like what would be a good example? Well, anything that we can get on here, maybe some additional damage, for instance, when we cold snap would be a good choice here. But we do have Captain Hunter on here to help us deal additional damage to enemies, or rather to captains, elites and bosses, because this is something which the build lacks a little bit. So anything that we can do to increase that is good here. We have Tainted Blood on here, which helps us capitalize on the bleed status. So if we are fighting a boss, then that's of course why I shoot them with the omen as well, because we get that additional sort of a damage for 3 seconds, and every time when you apply omen, you get that little damage spike there as well due to Tainted Blood. Overall, I would say that this headpiece is the weakest part of the 5 pieces of gear that I have on this armor, and I'm desperately looking for a purple piece or another piece that gives me the same mods, but that I can potentially get rid of Alchemical Mastery here and have something a bit more beneficial. When we get over to the chest itself, we have Party Starter on here, which increases the strength of Fixing Wave. Fixing Wave is of course one of the other skills that we use on here as well, and this is increases the strength of it by 8% for each enemy within the arena up to 100%. So this just overall makes your Fixing Wave hit for that much more HP, and that's why this is a great build to run alongside your buddies. You will constantly be feeding them HP and they will never go down, and this just makes that hit even harder. And this combo is important because we're going to see another mod which actually then takes any overheal that we do with Fixing Wave and actually weaponizes that and makes that deal toxic damage from you and from your allies. So no resistance against the fortified is good here, because we are stacking, and again we're doing this whole thing where we change armor piercing into resistance piercing into AP. And the other thing as well is that we are actually trying to ramp up our piercing values here, because it also affects a mod that I'll show you later on, which makes our toxic that much more spicy. So Icicle Storm on here is good. This is a no-brainer. This is kind of like an auto include whenever you use Cold Snap. Basically, it means that when you Cold Snap a bunch of stuff, the first thing that dies there sets off a chain reaction and essentially kills everything that's standing close to one another. Fantastic way to clear entire areas. And the reason why this build works so well is when you Cold Snap stuff, they get toxic on them. The toxic kills them, and as soon as the toxic kills the first enemy, it starts this ripple effect and everything just melts away. On the pants, we have Virulent Compound, which is like a mini Captain Hunter, and it just deals a little bit more damage to elites that are affected by Toxic or Blight Fire, and they kind of like explode after they die, spreading this effect to other enemies and dealing a little bit of damage. I think the damage value on this explosion is like super low, so it's not really like the highlight of this in any case, but any additional damage that we can deal to elites is good stuff. We want Long Winter because we want our Cold Snap is our main damage dealer in this build, or at least the main thing that sparks off our combo. So we want that to cover as wide an area as possible. So it's good stuff. Because stuff is going to be frozen for that long, we can capitalize off Shatter, which means that we deal more damage against enemies that are afflicted by freeze. This also means that when you hit Cold Snap and they get Toxic on them, the Toxic ticks are also going to hit for harder. Then we have Euthanize on here, which is more damage against enemies that are toxic. Stuff is fucking poisoned the entire time with this build, so this absolutely does you really well here. Unstoppable Force is our second mod in the combo with no resistance, which, you know, changes our armor piercing into resistance piercing into anomaly. We have Radical Therapy on here as well, which is like a baby euthanizer just for more damage against toxic. And then we, lastly but not least, we have, of course, our boots here with Anomaly Echo. For every time when we activate a skill, we get more anomaly. Our skills are on relative low cooldown, especially the fact that we run around with a turret that we can throw out, so this is like a great way for us to always make sure that we have this anomaly. Bad Medicine is the mod that I was referring to that basically weaponizes your fixing wave. So you'll notice that when you use fixing wave, it does this like pulse on you and then it hits out and it deals damage. Now what that does is the fixing wave heals you as well as your allies, and any amount of healing that you overheal the enemy by then actually changes into damage, and it does this damage in a 10-meter radius around you and the other players. So this is a fantastic way to essentially pulse out additional toxic damage, and often comes in really clutch when you run into a group of enemies. You hit them with the Cold Snap, and then you use this fixing wave, Bad Medicine wave, to essentially spark off the Cold Snap that then starts the cascade chain reaction and kills everything. Toxic Piercer is really good in this build because this increases the effectiveness of toxic by 100% of your resistance piercing, and that's why we try to stack as much resistance piercing as we can. Now this gives us a 65% improved toxic, and the other reason why we run around with our pistols out the whole time is because our pistols have armor piercing on as well, which again translates into resistance piercing due to our 2 mods on our gear, and that's how we get our amount up to 65%, plus of course some things that we pick up in the class tree, and I think, yeah, it's the class tree, yeah, that we pick up in the class tree. Anyway, getting over to the skills itself, of course by now I think you figured it out. We're using Cold Snap, we're using Fixing Wave, and we're using Blighted Turret. Now Blighted Turret is another way for us to get toxic onto enemies, but the main reason why we use Blighted Turret is because it's on such a super low cooldown. We can use it to constantly trigger stuff like, for instance, Anomaly Echo, as well as within our class tree we can trigger things like, for instance, Adrenalizing Antenna, which both of those just gives us more anomaly power, and so that's why we basically use it. Blighted Turret isn't going to deal any immaculate amount of damage. I mean, sometimes it chugs away, and because it's dealing so much additional damage to stuff that's toxic, it can be kind of cute how it just sprays and murders like little trash. But the main reason why we use it is for this ramp up. Now, as mentioned, if we're talking about rotation, you will often see me run into an engagement and I'll start by throwing the Blighted Turret. I'll hit the Cold Snap. The Cold Snap will reach across the entire arena, and then I'll run over to whichever enemy is the toughest one, which I think will take the longest to kill, and I'll hit them with the Fixing Wave Overheal combo, as well as a reload off the shotgun. And that usually deals with everything else, and then when you look around you, you'll notice that everything else has basically succumbed to, toxic, to poison. When we look at the class tree itself, we absolutely want to go Tech Shaman, because we want to have access to Overclocked in the end there, because we have 2 abilities that can essentially, engage it, and that is of course Fixing Wave as well as Cold Snap. But in the first place, we are going to be going down here and picking up some additional resistance piercing and anomaly, and we want to proceed along this track until we get to Adrenalizing Antenna, because we want to have that ramp ability with Blighted Turret. Then we're going to go up, we're going to get Wipeout, which is just some execute damage against bosses and stuff. So anything that has that you aren't killing very fast, once it gets to below 30% of its HP, it's going to take additional damage, which is great. Over here, we go this way now. What you can do is you can pick up Exposing Frost and Marked for Execution, or you can pick up Exposing Toxin and Marked for Execution. I chose to do the Toxin one because, again, stuff generally speaking, has poison on it for far, or has toxin on it for far longer than it has cold snap on it. But I think either which way, probably both work. But the point is, I go this way. I pick up a fracture for additional damage against things that are frozen, get a little bit of HP here, pick up exposing toxin and marks for execution. Then I go this way. I get some cooldown reduction. I get Saul's 56 freezing tanks, which makes freeze last a little bit longer. We go. We pick up Doctor of Medicine, which increases our healing by 20% for you and your allies. This is a fantastic partner build to run with people, because you're just pumping out so much debuff and so much control over the enemies, as well as just topping up your allies and yourself with HP the entire time. We do get Fracture here, which gives us more damage against freeze once again, and we get Overclocked, which is an excellent ramp mechanic for our anomaly power, and it also gives us like a Phoenix effect. Like if for some reason we were to go down, we get one free get up. Now the PAX tree itself, I think it's fairly standard. What we do here is, the way that I run this build, which is really good at killing trash, is I go and I pick up Initial Striker. I get Lethal Devices, which then means that whenever I cold snap, that cold snap applies Toxic as well. And that's why this is so good at dealing just massive amounts of damage to large amounts of enemies. It's also the reason why Toxic is the star of this build. We do get Painkiller here, which says that damaging an enemy grants you 2% health regeneration. So this is the other reason why we have a hard time going down. I get Permanence here, and I get Dissection, which basically just means that every time I apply Toxic to something, it gets a random additional effect on it. So that can mean it can get Burn on it, it can get you know, in any of the other statuses can basically stack on top of that, and this can create some pretty wonky effects where something is, you know, simultaneously bleeding, burning, and frozen, and got Toxic on it, which is hilarious. And then Dissection means that you deal more damage against stuff for every status that it has on it, which is good stuff. Now, I did mention at the beginning of the build that there's another version of this that you could run that is much better at murdering bosses, but not so good at killing trash. And in that case, what you actually do is you go to the bottom. So you go and you grab Undying, you grab yourself Override, you grab yourself Apothecary. Now, these choices basically just gives you a little bit of additional anomaly power because of your skill leech. You get this, which pulses out healing for your enemy, well, not for your enemy, Jesus, for your allies. But then what you do grab is you grab Hastened Influence, which this says, this is ridiculous. This says that it reduces the remaining cooldown of your skills by 0.5 seconds for every status removed by you or applied to enemy. Now, you are constantly going to be applying statuses with this, which means that it is going to pump down your cooldowns on the rest of your skills. And by using Hastened Influence, you're going to have cold snaps almost every 4 to 5 seconds, which is ridiculous. But the main star here is Burrowing Charge, and this says that critical shots inject enemies with an explosive charge for 5 seconds, dealing 250% of anomaly power as damage upon the next critical shot taken. So when you go with the pistols and you ramp on the enemy, you go and you drill him and you get all those crit shots, that's going to inject the Burrowing Charge, and that's going to explode, and that's going to deal 250% of your anomaly power, which you are ramping up already, and which is your permanent your main stat on this build. So it's going to hit for huge amounts, and this actually chunks bosses down quite well. So that's really the difference between the two. So if I'm struggling with a disgusting boss, or I know I'm going up against like the second Arbiter or something like that, I simply just deselect these, select that path, and then fight the Arbiter like that. Now, when it comes to the Ascension tree, again, yeah, I have quite a few points, but because Anomaly is the star of this, you do want to target at the beginning here. Obviously, picking up Anomaly damage is a no-brainer, because that just, you know, increases your damage overall due to the fact that it's on top. And then what you can do is you can start picking things like Status Power is good, just for the additional, like I said, tick power of toxicity, as well as Frost lasting longer, or Frozen lasting longer. Skill Leech is good for, I mean, for some reason, if you want more life gain, I mean, come on. But yes, you can just push up your anomaly power over here. And then what you can also do is, if you're struggling with elite damage or something like that, you can give yourself a little bit of additional survivability against that here. Maybe pick up some resistance, maybe pick up some HP, something like that. I like picking up the additional magazine size, because it just means that my pistols are running around with 50 bullets in the magazine, so it's longer that I can fire it without having to reload, even though pistol reloads are super duper fast. And then additional cooldown reduction here is always good for just more cold snaps. The more times you cold snap, the faster you will kill everything, and the more you will control the battlefield. And that right there is it for the build. Honestly, when I started out building this, something in my head said to me, you know, this seems really good on paper, but it's probably gonna be kind of like underwhelming, and it's not gonna be that great. But I have to say that especially when it comes to the speed at which this is able to run expeditions and kill stuff in the expeditions, it is actually quite fun, and I really do like running this. Of course, I spent an inopportune amount of time playing triple turret techno, and that is absolutely still the king for me when it comes to AP Technomancer. But this is a fun way of playing the class, and it's a nice holiday away from triple turret techno. And because I'm a pyro at heart, it basically plays the class like a pyromancer. And I mean, what's not to love about that? Let me know in the comments below how you would change this, if you've set up something similar, ways that you think that we can basically improve this. And most importantly, let me know which other builds you'd like to see, which other classes you'd like to see me target. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. It is just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, and evening, wherever you are in the world. And until next video, fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me.